What's up, guys? It's Dan from Coin Bureau Trading. Today, we're going to take a look at where we are in the crypto market cycle and what comes next. If this is the kind of content that you enjoy, then be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ping that notification bell. Before we get started, to keep in mind that nothing in this video is financial advice. It's just my personal analysis of the crypto market. Your analysis could be different, and if it is, that's awesome, because the more difference of opinion that we have, the better traders and the better investors we're all going to become. So I'm going to start off with a chart that you guys might be familiar with. This chart comes from Michael Howell, who's an expert in global liquidity, and this basically tells you, at least according to Michael's analysis, when you should be investing in different assets across the liquidity cycle. So you can see when liquidity is rising, you want to be in stocks and crypto. And it says equities, but in practical terms, that means like stocks and crypto. And when liquidity is peaking, you actually want to be in commodities. This is something that a lot of people don't understand when they talk about, oh, Michael Howell says liquidity is peaking, therefore it's bullish for crypto. That's technically not true. That's typically when commodities take over. But in any case, what's really interesting about this asset allocation cycle, guys, is you'll notice is that there's no specific timelines, right? It doesn't say that this period lasts for 4 months and this period lasts for 6 months, or this whole thing lasts for, whatever it is, 2 or 3 years. Of course, some of you guys might know that Michael's hypothesis is that the length of the liquidity cycle depends on the debt refinancing cycle. But even then, it's not something where there's like a specific number of days, looking at whatever it is, exactly 3 years or exactly 4 years or exactly 5 years. It's something that kind of varies, and you kind of have to play it by ear as to where we are in this liquidity cycle and which assets you should be investing in. It's a similar thing when it comes to this business cycle chart, very similar actually to Michael Howell's. This comes from another macro analyst named John Greenwood. He was a presenter at a macro kind of course that I recently did, and what was really interesting is that in this macro course, there was a whole bunch of charts that looked like Michael Howell's, a whole bunch of charts like from John Greenwood and other macro analysts. And what you'll notice, guys, is that all of these charts, they do not have specific days, right? They do not say that this phase takes 6 months and this phase takes 4 months and this, right? Even like this whole cycle, in this case, in John Greenwood's analysis, this whole cycle depends on the path of Fed interest rates. So, of course, you can never know for sure how long is it going to take for the Fed to raise rates and then drop rates. That's something that kind of varies from cycle to cycle. Even though the timeline you can say is roughly 4 years, the exact number of days, the exact number of months, that tends to vary. And in turn, the exact number of months and when you should be in these assets, that kind of is slightly different between different cycles. And this brings me, I guess, to the key question is like, well, what does this mean? Like, why are you even mentioning this? Well, because when it comes to the crypto cycle, guys, especially when it comes to rotation between Bitcoin, Ethereum, large caps, altcoin season, I'm sure that you guys have seen this chart before, this kind of flow chart showing how capital rotates from Bitcoin into Ethereum, into large caps, and into other altcoins. What you guys might not have noticed is that what makes this chart actually so good is that it also doesn't say specifically that, this phase takes this amount of time, this phase takes this amount of time, right? And what more importantly, it doesn't say that this whole phase of going from phase 1 to phase 4, it doesn't specify that this phase takes, whatever it is, exactly 4 years or exactly 5 years or exactly 3 years. But of course, when you look at this chart, you kind of inherently assume, well, this whole flow chart, this must happen within this 4-year cycle period, because we're all kind of conditioned to look at the crypto market cycle through a very strict, and again, I'm not saying that the 4-year cycle has been violated or extended or anything. It's just that we're trained, as a result of analysis within crypto, we're trained to look at things in a very strict kind of timeline form. When you look in other macro analysis of other assets, other macro analysis or other analysis of other assets does not have these strict timelines. I think a great example here is this 1064 day bull cycle that historically, that Bitcoin would basically, between lows and highs, it would take around 1064 days. And of course, that 1064 day period kind of passed whatever it was, like a month or a month and a half ago. And because people are saying, well, we're now, whatever it is, 20 days or 30 days above this 1064 day period, so therefore the cycle is over and this whole flow chart has been invalidated. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how come other macro analysts and analysis of other assets, they don't do that? They don't look at things strictly and saying, well, it's been 1064 days, so I guess this whole kind of liquidity cycle is violated. They say, no, I guess that means that we must be somewhere else, and that maybe something is taking a little bit longer or a little bit shorter than usual. It might be by a month or two. It doesn't mean that the whole cycle has been invalidated and that there's going to be an extended cycle or a shortened cycle. It just means that, you have to have a little bit of wiggle room of a couple of months, So again, with all that being said, this begs the question, okay, if we know that phase one in the crypto cycle is Bitcoin, phase two is Ethereum, like following kind of a similar pattern to these macro charts, phase one is Bitcoin, phase two is Ethereum, phase three is large caps, phase four is altcoin season. Where exactly are we? How can we tell where we are in this flow chart, to get a sense of where we are exactly in the crypto cycle? And in my opinion, guys, I think the answer is very simple. That's to look, especially because, first is Bitcoin, second is Ethereum. Then we just have to look at the ETH BTC pair, which tells us the strength of Ethereum versus Bitcoin. And you can see that for this entire cycle, basically until the spring of this year, ETH BTC had been declining, declining, declining. And it wasn't until April of this year that we started to see a gradual uptick in ETH BTC with gradually higher lows. I think this is something I mentioned earlier in the week as well. So again, it wasn't until April 2025, you could say, that in this crypto market, that kind of cycle or rotation here, it wasn't until April that we actually started entering phase two, which is kind of crazy to wrap your head around, right? That everyone thinks, oh, like, it's already over. Altcoin season happened in 2024 or in late 2024, early 2024. But if we're looking at things objectively here and saying, okay, similarly to how we have this liquidity cycle showing where you should rotate into assets, we can kind of narrow that down and look at the crypto market cycle through that same lens and ask, okay, where are we? When did phase two begin? And you could make the argument that phase two began, again, based on ETH BTC, began only in April. And that's only when we started to see, this gain of Ethereum versus Bitcoin. And of course, that's very interesting because that means that, we're still, and you can make the argument that, yeah, of course, we've been chopping, let's say, between these overlap phases, right? Because it's not clear cut. So, there's kind of like some struggling of capital flowing into Ethereum. That's kind of what we saw here, that you initially saw a huge rally up, and then that capital flowed back into Bitcoin. But now over the last few weeks, we're starting to see capital flow back into Ethereum, right? So we're kind of somewhere, chopping, let's say, around this like phase two, based on this, path to altcoin season chart, let's say. And of course, that begs the question, when are we going to start really entering phase three and going into phase four? And of course, the answer there, guys, in my view, is very simple, and that's to look at Bitcoin dominance. And you can see that historically speaking, I did my best to kind of draw it out here. Maybe I'll remove the Bollinger Bands to make things a bit clearer. You can see that historically speaking, that when we saw this sharp drop in Bitcoin dominance, especially that, I don't want to say second leg lower, but when you see a key drop below a support level in 2017 that was around 52%, once you saw that drop below 52%, that by that stage, that's when we were really, going from this phase three into phase four. And that's what we saw again in 2017. That's what we saw in 2021. So you can make the argument that if you want to know when are we going to be entering this kind of phase three, phase four rotation, that's not going to happen until Bitcoin dominance falls below somewhere around 55%, which again, assuming Ethereum, the ETH BTC pair continues rising, Bitcoin dominance is going to continue falling, and eventually it will break down below this key support level. And that will basically mark that, say, yeah, like we're done with the Ethereum phase, and now we're moving into the large cap phase, and that altcoin season phase will follow shortly thereafter. And of course, the thing I know that's like frustrating for many people is like, well, it's taken so long and the 4-year cycle has been invalidated because, now it's whatever it is, 30 days or 50 days or 100 days longer, which in absolute terms is like, 4 or 5% longer than normal cycles, right? And you might think like, well, is that really that big of a difference in when it comes to, I guess if you were to ask this to a macro analyst, they would say, well, when it comes to macro, to see deviations of a few months in these cycles is completely normal. So why aren't we giving the same kind of flexibility to crypto? And instead of, being very strict and saying, well, it has to be 1,064 days, we say, well, let's look at things through the lens of phases, the same way that macro analysts do with everything else. And again, this chart is very helpful here, that we have basically been in phase one for most of this cycle, and only since this spring have we entered phase two. We're still kind of chopping within that phase two range, and eventually that phase three and phase four should come, assuming this time is not different, of course. And the one thing that's, and I guess the reason why we've seen so much of a, I guess you could say like of a delay, has to do with what's been going on the macro front. This is something I explained many times as well, that if you look at the DXY and the US dollar, historically, when it would get that first leg lower, that would be a crypto rally led by Bitcoin. Then we would have a few months of chop, like around 3 months, maybe 4 months max. And then we would have a second leg lower that would correspond to altcoin season. That's what we saw in 2017. That's what we saw in 2020 and 2021. And what's kind of different this time is that we've seen the US dollar basically chopping for almost 6 months here, which is unprecedented. It's like, closing in on being close to double the amount of time that we've seen in previous cycles where there would be DXY chop before that second leg lower. And of course, there's no guarantee, just looking at the last past 2 cycles, it's not a very big sample size. There's no guarantee that the DXY is going to have that second leg lower. But as soon as it does, you can know with relative confidence that that's what's going to translate to an altcoin season. So again, I guess it's a long-winded way of saying that to figure out where we are in the cycle, we can kind of identify that we're in phase 2 just by looking at ETH BTC. As to when we're going to enter phase 3 or phase 4, that has to do with Bitcoin dominance, which again does look like it's on the brink of getting another breakdown here in the next few weeks, let's say next couple of months. And of course, I've been saying that for a long time, and I'm sure many people have been saying that for a long time as well. And that's simply because if you look historically speaking on the macro level, we should have seen this breakdown in Bitcoin dominance, and we should have seen that kind of altcoin season starting at the latest sometime in September, based on historical patterns in the US dollar. And what's quote unquote different this time is that US dollar has been chopping for a lot longer and kind of being stubborn and refusing to break down. And the result is that you've seen basically a gradual, let's say, liquidity drain away from altcoins, with Bitcoin kind of chopping around, slowly grinding higher, but most altcoins grinding lower, and select altcoins pumping here and there, but nothing like, that resembles an altcoin season. And this is everyone thinking, again, when you combine this with the 4-year cycle, everyone thinks, well, this means it's over. It's been 1,064 days, therefore the cycle is over. And this whole process did not play out and it's over. But when you, again, when you like step back and, just add yourself a little bit of flexibility, which is what you should be doing as an analyst, is again, it's like things don't work strictly in terms of time. You realize, wait a minute, we're probably in phase 2 here, and it looks like phase 3 and phase 4 will come. But of course, that is dependent on the US dollar. And I will mention, guys, is if this is the kind of analysis that you enjoy, this is the kind of analysis that I'm doing almost every single day in the Coin Bureau Club. That's where we do deep dives into small cap altcoins. We also allow our members to vote on which altcoins we review. We have a research feed where I'm sharing these types of insights. We have a team portfolio page where you can see the cryptos we hold as well as the cryptos we're considering buying. We have an exclusive deals page that have discounts on other crypto research platforms. And we have a members only Discord where you can ask us questions about everything under the sun, this type of content and everything else. And we did recently do an upgrade to the hub here, that you have a light plan that is much more affordable than the previous standard plan. Let's say you can check out the link to that down in the description. And if you guys did make it this far and you did find that information helpful, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, ping that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next one.